Hey, welcome back to Miniature Mashup. Today we're going to talk paint, which ones to use and which ones to lose.
D&D is morally deficient.
Dungeons and Dragons.
It's spiritually corrupt. It is educationally evil because it teaches evil, and it is potentially dangerous.
Mazes and monsters are far out gate.
Now I am making your silver pants blue.
Welcome back to another episode of Miniature Mashup. Today I've got kind of a nuts and bolts video for you. I won't be doing any funny sketches or cartoons. I just want to address a question I get a lot, and that is, what kind of paint do I use here at Miniature Mashup headquarters? Well, let's get into that in some detail. I want to talk about my philosophy of paint, and I may as well show you my brushes as well while I'm at it. So first of all, paint is a tool. Whether you're painting a house or a portrait, you need the right tool for the job. So the first thing you need to figure out is, what am I painting for? That is, what is the job I'm doing? For miniatures of any kind, you're going to want acrylic paint, of course. But even that's a little bit of a broad category, which can be pared down, as acrylic paint varies in price and quality from these discounted soy paints I picked up for 50 cents a bottle at a craft store, all the way up to Games Workshop's paint with flaked gold leaf and bald eagle tears mixed into it that costs 14 times as much. So ask yourself, why are you painting miniatures? If you're painting miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons tabletop use, I recommend these cheaper craft store paints, especially for larger projects like terrain and buildings and vehicles, and especially if you're just starting out as well. The qualities that make these more expensive paints better are going to be wasted in inexperienced hands. You're going to apply them too thickly, you're going to be sloppy, you won't have the techniques to really take advantage of what makes them better. Don't cut your teeth on the expensive stuff. Start out with the cheap craft paint and work your way up. As you can see, there are a lot of cheap craft paints out there. These are all what you would call craft paints. You get these at Michael's or Joann's, any craft store, and there's just so many different brands here. Aleene's, and as you can see, I get these on sale, 25 cents for this. Craft Smart, and at this level, these paints are all pretty much the same. There's really, I say, just go for the cheapest ones you can get. There's not any real difference. And just a tip, if you do start to accumulate a lot of these, as I have, one of the ways I help to organize them, especially if they don't have a little color dot, like this one does here, to indicate the color, I put a little something on the top. So that's not a bum, it's burnt umber. This is a yellow, this is a red. I can't get more specific than that. Just one big letter helps me figure out what I'm looking at a lot faster. I know some of you high-end paint purists are tearing your hair out and saying, no, look, craft paint just isn't as good as the hobby paint you get from Games Workshop or Reaper. And no, it's not. But the number one determining factor in the quality of your miniatures is your skill with the paintbrush. What you can do with these paints is entirely in your hand. It's your level of your skill that you get through practice. I have miniatures that I've painted up to a quality that I'm very proud of, I'm happy to show off, and I've done it entirely with craft paint. And some of my very first miniatures, when I was learning to paint, they were all done with Games Workshop stuff. That's what I started on. That's what I cut my teeth on. I didn't even know craft paint existed until I had been in the game probably for about 10 years. But some of those first minis that I did with Games Workshop paint are terrible because I didn't know what I was doing. The paint wasn't the issue. You may be asking yourself why I recommend cheap paints for D&D specifically. Well, for starters, D&D might be the game that is the most hard on painted miniatures. When characters are knocked down or out, minis are often knocked over to represent that. A lot of the times people will clear tables hastily. People are going to be handling them a lot. People who are eating food are going to be handling them a lot. There'll be soda and drinks on the table, and soda is not the friend of paint of any kind. Your miniatures are going to get knocked off the table during crazy play sessions, and you don't want your group to be hyper conscious of the expensive and very nicely painted miniatures you have. At least I don't. I want my group relaxed and focused on the game. So I'm not going to put, miniatures with a $20 coat of paint on the table. Instead, I'm going to mostly use those craft paints. So stick to the cheap stuff. That's my advice to you. Now, in most war games, you're going to be the only person touching your miniature most of the time, right? I mean, 99% of the time. And most people who are war gamers know to sort of handle miniatures by the base and stuff. So if you want to use more expensive paints in that context, it's okay. If you can afford to buy Games Workshop miniatures and books, you can probably afford to buy their paints as well. I still mostly use craft store paints on my Warhammer figures, especially for base coating, since that's just going underneath anyway. And I use some of the higher end paints for detail work around the faces and such. And I also find that Games Workshop technical paints, their washes and things like Typhus Corrosion, can be real time savers, and there's really no cheap equivalent of them. You can certainly get a similar effect by watering down craft store paints and working them in as a wash, but that takes some skill. Now, certainly more skill than just using a Games Workshop wash, and it also takes more time than simply using the Games Workshop washes. So for me, it's worth that extra investment just to buy the better washes and paint. Now, for display-worthy competitive stuff, if you're going for a Golden Demon, like you see on the channel Next Level Painting, this is a fun channel for me to watch. A shout out to this guy, who, by the way, was living nearby in Durham until just recently. I'm sorry I never got a chance to meet this guy and learn some of his amazing airbrushing skills. He only uses top quality paints, and he works with his airbrush a lot. On a scale of 1 to 10, this guy paints at a 10. Color-wise, when I'm talking about what colors I own a ton of browns and greens because they're very common colors for both terrain and monsters. And brush-wise, I have this newish set from Reaper. These are sort of my masterwork tools. But I own a ton of old beat-up brushes that I use for a variety of things. The only brushes I've ever thrown out have been ruined by friends who borrowed them without asking and then left them caked in paint overnight. Also get yourself a couple of giant brushes like this for terrain purposes. You don't want to tackle something like this dungeon here. I'm only going to show you this for a second because that's an upcoming video. Fine art brush. You will be at it forever. You want to save time. You want to cover as much area as possible, as quickly as possible. Get yourself some large brushes as well. Well, I hope that's helpful to new people starting out. If you're watching my channel and you're not into painting miniatures, I hope this was a little bit of a guide. You can see I own way too much paint. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you're not subscribed already, subscribe to my channel. Hit that like button and spread it around. I'm trying to get viewers. Thanks again. This is Miniature Mashup. I'll have a new video for you soon.